When King James II ruled England, his household overflowed with children, princes and princesses who should have secured the Stuart dynasty for centuries. Yet within one lifetime, nearly every branch of his family either died out, disappeared into exile, or merged into foreign courts. Some died before they could walk, others became queens, generals, or even the ancestors of modern royals. Today, their names survive only in forgotten parish registers and Spanish ducal titles. So what really happened to the 24 children of the last Catholic king of England? In the next half hour, we'll trace every life from royal nursery to distant descendants and see how the once mighty Stuart bloodlines scattered across Europe. James II ascended the English throne in 1685 as a man already shaped by loss and exile. The younger brother of Charles II, he had witnessed the execution of their father, lived through years of Republican rule, and seen the monarchy restored. But unlike his pragmatic brother, James wore his Catholic faith openly, a decision that would ultimately cost him his crown and scatter his children across the continent. James married twice and acknowledged mistresses who bore him children. His first wife, Anne Hyde, daughter of his brother's chief minister, gave him 8 children before her death in 1671. His second marriage to the young Italian princess Mary of Modena produced 7 more. Beyond these legitimate heirs, James acknowledged children by at least 2 mistresses, Arabella Churchill, sister to the future Duke of Marlborough, and Catherine Sedley, daughter of a court wit. In total, we can trace 22 live-born children of James II, legitimate and acknowledged illegitimate. Their stories illuminate not just the collapse of a dynasty, but the strange paths by which royal blood travels through history. Some lived to rule kingdoms, others barely drew breath. Some founded noble houses that endure today, others vanished without trace. Let us follow each life in order of birth and see how the children of England's last Catholic king met their fates. The first child born to James and Anne Hyde arrived in October 1660, barely 5 months after their secret marriage was revealed. Young Charles represented hope, the first grandson of the martyred king, born into a restored monarchy. The infant received his grandfather's name and the prestigious title Duke of Cambridge, but 17th century royal nurseries were precarious places. Charles lived just 5 months, dying in May 1661 of causes typical for the era, likely what we would now call sudden infant death syndrome or complications from infectious disease. His death cast the first shadow over what should have been a triumphant new generation of Stuarts. James's second child would become the most politically significant. Born in April 1662, Mary Stuart grew up as a Protestant despite her father's Catholic leanings, a compromise arranged by her uncle, King Charles II, who recognized the political necessity of keeping potential heirs within the established church. Mary received an excellent education befitting a future queen. She spoke French fluently, studied history and literature, and developed the cultivated tastes expected of Stuart royalty. In 1677, she married her Dutch cousin William of Orange in a union that seemed dynastic but would prove revolutionary. When the Glorious Revolution erupted in 1688, Mary found herself in an impossible position, choosing between her father and her husband. She chose William, accepting the crown as joint monarch in 1689. Mary ruled England, Scotland, and Ireland alongside William III until her death from smallpox in December 1694. Tragically, despite 17 years of marriage, Mary bore no children. Her death ended the first branch of James II's lineage with hope of continuing the Protestant Stuart line. The third child and second son arrived in July 1663, again receiving the Cambridge ducal title. This James lived longer than his elder brother, but still succumbed to childhood illness at age 4. His death in June 1667 eliminated another potential male heir and deepened the pattern of loss that would plague James II's dynastic hopes. The repeated deaths of Cambridge dukes became a source of courtly superstition, with some whispering that the title itself was cursed. Born in February 1665, Anne Stuart would become the last monarch of her dynasty, though she could not have known it as a child. Like her sister Mary, Anne was raised Protestant and received a thorough education in languages, music, and statecraft. In 1683, Anne married Prince George of Denmark, a match that pleased her father despite George's Protestant faith. The marriage proved personally happy but dynastically tragic. Anne endured 17 pregnancies, but only one child, Prince William, Duke of Gloucester, survived infancy, and he died at age 11 in 1700. When Mary died childless in 1694, Anne became heir presumptive. She ascended the throne in 1702 following William III's death and ruled for 12 years. Her reign saw the union of England and Scotland, military victories against Louis XIV, and the flourishing of arts and letters. But Anne's greatest failure was biological. Despite constant pregnancy, she produced no surviving heir. When she died in 1714, the crown passed to her German cousin, Elector George of Hanover, ending forever the Stuart hold on the British throne. The fifth child, born in July 1666, received the Kendall ducal title but lived less than a year. His death in May 1667 marked another brief hope extinguished in infancy. Named for an Anglo-Saxon king, Edgar seemed more promising than his predecessors. Born in September 1667, he survived his crucial early months and grew into a healthy toddler. Court observers began to hope that James had finally produced a surviving male heir. Those hopes died with Edgar in June 1671, just short of his 4th birthday. His death devastated James and Anne, who had watched 6 of their 8 children perish in infancy or early childhood. Born and died in 1669, leaving barely a trace in the historical record beyond her baptismal and burial entries. The last child of Anne Hyde, born and died in 1671 as her mother's health declined toward her own death that same year. After 8 births and only 2 surviving daughters, James remarried in hope of securing the Stuart dynasty with an enduring male line. James's first child, with his young second wife, Mary of Modena, was born in January 1675. The infant suffered from convulsions and died within days, a tragic beginning to what James hoped would be a more successful marriage. The second daughter of Mary of Modena brought 5 years of joy to the household. Born in August 1676, Isabella charmed the court with her precocious intelligence and beauty. She spoke multiple languages, showed artistic talent, and seemed to embody the best qualities of both her parents. Isabella's death from fever in March 1681 devastated both James and Mary. Court records describe the future king weeping openly at her funeral, while Mary fell into a depression that lasted months. The loss of this beloved child cast a shadow over James's later reign. Yet another Cambridge duke was born in November 1677, but this Charles lived only 1 month. His death in December represented the continuation of an increasingly bitter pattern for the Duke of York's family. Born and died in 1678 during a year when James faced political pressure over the popish plot allegations. The infant's death added personal grief to public crisis. Born in August 1682, Charlotte Maria lived just 2 months before succumbing to the illnesses that plagued 17th-century nurseries. Her death preceded her father's accession to the throne by 3 years. The birth of a son to James II in June 1688 should have secured the Catholic Stuart succession. Instead, it triggered the revolution that destroyed the dynasty. Protestant England could not accept a Catholic heir, and rumors spread that the infant was an impostor smuggled into the Queen's bed in a warming pan. The Glorious Revolution erupted within months of the prince's birth. By Christmas 1688, James II had fled to France with his infant son and wife, beginning a 78-year exile that would define the rest of the boy's life. James Francis Edward grew up at the court of Louis XIV, educated as a king-in-waiting who would never rule. He became the old pretender to his supporters, launching failed invasions of Scotland in 1708 and 1715. He married Maria Clementina Sobieska in 1719 and had 2 sons, Charles Edward Stuart, the young pretender of the 1745 Rising, and Henry Benedict Stuart, who became a cardinal. Neither son produced legitimate heirs. When James Francis Edward died in 1766, his legitimate male line continued through Cardinal Henry, but ended definitively with the cardinal's death in 1807. The lawful Stuart claim to the British throne died with him. The last legitimate child of James II was born into exile at Saint-Germain-en-Laye in June 1692. Louisa Maria grew up in the shadow of her father's lost kingdom, educated in French and Italian alongside English, trained in the accomplishments expected of an exiled princess. Contemporaries praised her beauty, intelligence, and vivacity. She might have made a brilliant political marriage to secure foreign support for Stuart restoration. Instead, smallpox claimed her life in April 1712, aged just 19. With her death, the legitimate family of James II was reduced to just his son, James Francis Edward. While the lawful dynasty was fading in exile, James II's private life had created several enduring branches abroad. Born in the summer of 1667, Henrietta was James's first acknowledged illegitimate child. Her mother, Arabella Churchill, was sister to the future Duke of Marlborough and a woman of considerable intelligence and charm. Henrietta grew up acknowledged at court and received an education appropriate to her royal blood. In 1683, she married Henry Waldegrave, later 1st Baron Waldegrave, in a match that pleased both her father and her husband's family. The Waldegrave marriage proved dynastically significant far beyond its immediate political purpose. Henrietta and Henry had multiple children, establishing a line that would intermarry with English nobility for generations. Through a complex web of marriages, their descendants eventually connected to the Spencer family. Most remarkably, Henrietta Fitzjames is a direct ancestor of Diana, Princess of Wales, making the late princess and her sons, Princes William and Harry, descendants of James II through his mistress's line. This illegitimate branch of the Stuart bloodline thus returned to the British royal family through marriage, an irony that would have astonished the exiled king. James's natural son, by Arabella Churchill, became perhaps the most successful of all his children. Born in August 1670, young James showed early military promise and received an excellent education in both England and France. When his father fled England in 1688, James Fitzjames chose exile and loyalty over accommodation with the new regime. He entered French service and rose rapidly through the ranks, demonstrating exceptional strategic and tactical abilities that reminded observers of his grandfather's military talents. Louis XIV created him Duke of Berwick and Marshal of France, making him one of the highest-ranking foreign-born officers in French history. Berwick commanded French armies against the Grand Alliance and later fought in the War of Spanish Succession, where his victories helped secure Philip Fuf's claim to the Spanish throne. Berwick married twice and had numerous children. His descendants adopted the surname Fitzjames Stuart and became one of Spain's most prominent noble families. The current Duchess of Alba, one of Spain's richest and most titled aristocrats, descends directly from this illegitimate son of James II. The Duke of Berwick died gloriously in 1734, killed by a cannonball while besieging Philipsburg. His death ended one of the most distinguished military careers of the early 18th century. The third son of Arabella Churchill followed his elder brother into Jacobite service in French military life. Born in 1673, Henry showed promise as a soldier but lacked James's exceptional abilities. Henry served as an officer in Louis XIV's armies and supported his half-brother's claims to the British throne. However, he died relatively young in 1702, leaving no male issue. His death ended this particular branch of the Fitzjames line. The daughter of James and Arabella Churchill chose a path that reflected the religious complexities of her father's legacy. Born in 1674, she converted to Catholicism as a young woman and entered a Benedictine convent. Sister Arabella lived a contemplative life dedicated to prayer and scholarly pursuits. She died in 1704 at age 30, leaving no descendants but representing the spiritual dimension of Stuart exile. James's affair with Catherine Sedley, daughter of the court with Sir Charles Sedley, produced at least 3 children. The eldest, Catherine Darnley, was born around 1681 and lived the longest of any of James II's children. Catherine married twice into prominent English families. Her first husband was James Annesley, 3rd Earl of Anglesey, whom she married in 1699. After his death, she married John Sheffield, 1st Duke of Buckingham and Normanby, a former favorite of her father. Both marriages produced children, but the Darnley line eventually died out in the male branch. Catherine lived to see the Hanoverian succession firmly established and died in 1743, having outlived all her legitimate half-siblings except her nephew, the Cardinal Duke of York. The second child of Catherine Sedley was a son born in 1684. Like so many of James II's children, young James lived less than a year, dying in infancy in 1685, the same year his father ascended the throne. The third and final child of Catherine Sedley was another son, Charles, who also died young. With his death, the Sedley branch of James II's illegitimate offspring came to an end. Of 22 live-born children, James II saw most die in infancy or childhood. Only 5 lived to significant adulthood. His daughters, Mary II and Anne, who both became queens but died childless. His son James Francis Edward, whose exile ended the legitimate Stuart claim. His illegitimate son James Fitzjames, whose Spanish descendants endure. And his illegitimate daughter Henrietta, whose English descendants eventually rejoined the royal family. The mathematics of dynasty proved unforgiving. Despite constant pregnancy and birth, despite medical care available to royalty, despite the hopes invested in each new heir, the Stuart bloodline could not sustain itself on the English throne. The repeated deaths of infant princes, 5 separate Dukes of Cambridge died before age 5, created a crisis of succession that religious politics and revolution ultimately resolved against James II's favor. Yet the Stuart blood did not vanish entirely. It flows today through 2 remarkable channels: the great Spanish house of Fitzjames Stuart, whose current representatives include the Duchess of Alba, and through the complex genealogical path that brought Stuart blood back to Britain through Diana, Princess of Wales. The current princes, William and Harry, thus carry the blood of James II through his mistress's line, a genetic echo of the dynasty their ancestors' revolution overthrew. In Spain, the Dukes of Alba bear the Stuart name proudly, descendants of a bastard son who became a Marshal of France. From a palace nursery filled with heirs to a single Spanish dukedom and a distant royal branch, James II's children chart one of history's most dramatic collapses of a dynasty. Within 2 generations, England's last Catholic king left no rightful heir on his throne, but his blood still flows quietly through Europe's nobility and, unknowingly, in Britain's own modern princes. The Stuart dynasty died with Cardinal Henry in 1807, but the Stuart bloodline adapted, survived, and found new expressions across the centuries. In palaces in Madrid and London, in the genetic inheritance of princes and duchesses, something of James II's legacy endures, not as kings, but as the scattered seeds of a royal house that once ruled 3 kingdoms and left its mark on the history of Europe.